As the war in Israel continues to heat up, the situation grows a little bit more dire for Israel in the north. The reason for this is because, as we've talked about in previous episodes here, Israel completed the encirclement, for the most part, of Gaza City last week. And then they're actually moving into the next phase, which is the more difficult phase, which is going basically house to house and section by section. And this is where it's going to really get really dirty and take a long time. Now, concurrent with this, things on the north are starting to heat up. We first look at this from France 24.
The skies over the Israel-Lebanon border have been thick with smoke almost constantly for the last month. But in recent days, the exchange of fire between Israeli troops and Hezbollah fighters has intensified. On Sunday, Israeli fighter jets pounded Hezbollah targets after 7 Israeli troops and at least 10 other people were wounded. The army said it eliminated a Hezbollah squad that targeted civilians. Hezbollah has been ramping up its attacks across the Israeli border. On Saturday, the leader of the armed group announced it had begun using suicide drones and heavy warheads. Israel's military spokesperson says its focus is on Gaza, but troops are at a high level of readiness.
And in fact, as the report there concludes that the Israeli Defense Forces spokesman are talking about that, they're also simultaneously warning about what could come in the north.
Hezbollah and the Lebanese government are responsible for any rocket fire from Lebanon. The citizens of Lebanon will pay the price for this lawlessness and for Hezbollah's decision to be the protector of ISIS. The Israeli Defense Force has action plans to change the security situation in the north.
Now, in case anyone was uncertain about that or didn't quite believe it, Netanyahu himself also this past weekend reiterated a couple of things. First of all, how difficult the fight is on the ground in Gaza. And second, his warning to Hezbollah in the north.
All Hamas operatives and terrorists must die. Our forces are acting above and beneath the ground, targeting them. We are going to continue full force. We are going to continue until victory. We are also very well prepared in the northern front. We are using aggressive fire from the air and from the ground over there. And I have warned Hezbollah, don't make that mistake and enter the war.
Now, I want to stick with the idea of the tunnel fighting for just a moment, because that's really central to understanding the true scope and nature and where this war could end up going and how long it may take. Now, there was a report out a week or so ago that actually went to the front lines and took some cameras out there and interviewed a lot of the Israeli fighters, the soldiers themselves that were conducting this. And I want you to pay particular attention to what one of these soldiers says about the frequency of finding these tunnels under the ground.
So this pipe is connected to the water supply, so they can stay there for a long time with water, with food, with electricity. Very well built.
They are fighting like that, like rats, from point 1 to point 2 under the city, under the ground.
We go and look into hospitals and we see that there's so many tunnels under it, so much ammunition that's under it at the moment. And we go house by house to check each one of them and see what the situation is. And sadly, there's tunnels after tunnels after tunnels full of ammunition, full of papers explaining how to attack Israel, how to come and slaughter Israeli citizens. Everything here we see every day in the tunnels. Every couple of hours we get indication of more tunnels that are coming this way under every part of Gaza, at least in our area at the moment.
We are in North Gaza. You see, it's a civilian city. You want to wish that it's a normal city, but in every 2 or 3 houses we see bombs, we see entrance of tunnels. It's not a little organization, a terror organization that it's a massive of we have here rockets and arms, and I tell you the tunnel, it's everywhere.
That's one of the key things to really to understand, that those tunnels are everywhere. You've heard a lot about them, that there are potentially 300 miles or so of tunnels, but to really get a grasp of what that's going to mean for the fighting, let me again show you a graphic that we pulled up before from Google Earth, which really shows just how comprehensive and how huge the area is we're talking about. One of those soldiers was specifically mentioning that every 2 or 3 buildings, that there were tunnel systems under it. And look, again, to reiterate, you have to clear each one of these tunnels. You can't just like say, all right, we're going to bypass this area and we're going to move on here, which you can do in a typical maneuver warfare, for example. You can bypass certain areas and seal them off and move around to take larger objectives elsewhere. But with tunnel systems, especially in cities, and again, just look at the density of these buildings. Just in the screen you're seeing right there, you see so many, literally hundreds of buildings, and you have to clear each one of them. Just imagine how much time it's going to take to be able to find out conclusively with each one of these buildings here, are there tunnels under it? Are there not? Are we going to clear it or are we not? Are we going to destroy them? Is there any way to do that? You see that the task, the enormity of the task is just simply mind-boggling. Now, the real danger, I think, for Israel is if they're coming into that fight and they get deep into it. Let's say it's a month, 2 months, 3 months from now. And, the casualties are going to certainly start going up when you get into this literal house-to-house fighting. And if that starts to happen, now then the danger from the north starts to get a little bit higher. Now, we also had both Nasrallah, Hassan Nasrallah, the leader of Hezbollah, and another pretty straightforward warning from Gallant, the Minister of Defense for Israel, also over the weekend, said this.
אזרחי לבנון צריכים לדעת שאם נסראללה יעשה טעות, גורלה של ביירות עלול להיות כמו גורלה של עזה.
Now, at the moment, Nasrallah, this is now his second speech that he's made in 2 weeks. And the first one, everyone was worried, is he going to make a declaration of war on Israel? I argued at the time probably he would not, because if he was going to do it, the last thing he's going to do is give a warning about it. And so he didn't. He just voiced his concern. At that time, you may recall the key thing he said was, this was 100% Hezbollah, wasn't Iran, it wasn't us, nobody else did it. It was them. So he wanted to make sure, and he signaled there that they're not ready to launch into a war. This one was similar to that, except that he's keeping the pressure on, and he's saying that the Arab League, which is another big thing that happened over the weekend, where there were 57 nations and Islamic entities that met together in Riyadh in Saudi Arabia. And again, you had across the board, you had nations that very often are against each other, all coming together to talk about the problem in Israel and in the war, particularly in Gaza, and in the humanitarian losses, and especially the attacks on the hospitals. And if you saw our deep dive on this subject on Saturday, we talked about Israel is in a real conundrum, and something they're going to have to be very careful about, because you can't just target those hospitals first, especially, and move on them, because it is such a flaming issue for the Arab public throughout the Middle East. And I'm not in a position to say, are there really Hamas fighters under the hospital, or is it just a pretext on the Israeli side? I honestly can't say. I'd like to be able to say, no, for sure it is, or for sure it's not. I just don't have the information. Both sides are claiming exactly that from their side. Israel says for sure there is. The Hamas side and the Palestinian side, the hospital administrators say for sure there's not. That's not the case. I don't know. But what I do know for sure is that by Israel targeting these places, and now 2 of them are completely knocked out of capacity because they don't have the ability to function, it is causing a real problem with maintaining Western resolve. Because here's some of the hospitals you see on there. Two of these 4 on the screen here. There's 6 of them, I think, that are in the area. We also showed some horrific footage from some of the explosions near one of those hospitals also over the weekend. Here you can go back and look at our deep dive on that one. But you see, that's just the kind of thing that could both erode support for Israel on the Western side and exacerbate anger against Israel from the Arab side. And both of those trends are bad for Israel, and they're going to have to start fighting this war smartly and not so much emotionally. And as we've said before, especially as someone who suffered the indignities of 9/11, Americans understand the natural desire to want to get revenge and justice by the terrorists who killed a lot of your civilian people. That's understandable. But you have to do things wisely. And I've seen it from my own perspective. I've fought in 4 combat deployments, some of which were in situations, especially in Afghanistan, where I was part of the process and observed it firsthand, to where we had intelligence that there were enemy combatants in certain areas, but they were also in buildup areas where there were civilians. And I watched how we were very careful to avoid civilian casualties. We failed too many times, as is well known. And anytime you fail and civilians are killed, it's horrible. But I can tell you that we did put in a lot of effort to try and limit or even eliminate the process for civilian casualties. But it also came at a price. I also saw that it took a long time to make actions. It took a long time to get the intelligence to make sure it was right, or give warnings to make sure that the people knew, and then to make sure that they were out of the way. That's costly in time, and sometimes it's even more difficult militarily. But ultimately, Israel has to do that if they want to maintain support from the West, and if they don't want to exacerbate anger from the Arab world. Now, the Arab world also understands to a certain extent that Israel would need to go in and to deal justice on Hamas. And as you all probably know, many in the Middle East hate Hamas almost as much as Israel does because of the Muslim Brotherhood connection, which many of the regimes in the area just absolutely detest. Ask Egypt. But what Israel is going to have to start doing here is being careful of 2 things. Number one is that they prosecute the war in the tunnel systems and in Gaza in a more methodical and military way that does protect the civilian population. And they're going to have to keep an eye on that northern border, because here's the bigger risk for Israel tactically. Let's say that, like I mentioned a minute ago, it's say 2 months from now, 3 months, it's January of 2024. And they're now well into Gaza City, and they're methodically going through these tunnel systems. They're taking casualties because that's where the casualty count's going to go higher. You can't clear tunnels on the cheap. It's going to be costly. Then the risk comes even higher that Hezbollah could come in at a time when Israel is weakened. Now, we certainly hope that's not going to happen. The U.S., I'm certain, has lots of intelligence assets all pointed in that direction and would alert Israel if there was any kind of a buildup or any kind of indications and warnings that they were going to move. And certainly that would be the case. But even if you have the indications, is only going to help you so much, because if you're decisively engaged in one area, now all of a sudden the northern front opens up, that's going to be bad for Israel. But even worse for the region and even the United States, because the absolute highest priority for the U.S. right now is to keep this war contained in the Gaza Strip and get it over with as soon as possible, so that Israel has its security, but also that the civilian population in Gaza does not suffer any more unnecessary. And look, there's going to be a big bill to pay already for both the U.S., the Israel, and the region, and really that part of the world, in trying to untangle the mess that's already been created inside the Gaza Strip. And that's beyond the scope of this deep dive talking to here, but understand it's going to be a massive lift once the fighting is done. But to even get there successfully, Israel's going to have to change how they operate on the ground, and they're going to have to watch that northern border. That's all we got for you today. We're going to keep keeping you updated on this, because I assure you this is a very dynamic situation that changes by the day, sometimes even by the hour. But we are unafraid and unintimidated, and we are going to continue to be here for you and giving you the true story about whatever's going on, whether it's good or bad from anybody's perspective. That's not our problem. I'm just going to give you the information you need to make your own decisions and to understand what's happening. Thanks. Be sure to like and subscribe, and we will look forward to seeing you on the next episode of Deep Dive.